The earth was young, a canvas freshly painted by the Creator's hand. Yet even in its nascent beauty, death stalked humankind. A silent decree whispered on the wind. It was a presence both ethereal and absolute. It began with the first stain of innocent blood soaking into the ground, a primal wound upon the world. From that moment forward, generations bloomed and withered like dust devils dancing across the barren plains, their lives fleeting echoes in the grand symphony of time. Humanity, in its relentless pursuit of progress, learned to build towering cities that scraped the heavens, but in that same breath, discovered new and terrible ways to tear them down. The more magnificent the outward facade became, the more insidious the rot festered within, a hidden corruption eating away at the very soul of civilization. But precisely amidst this descent into darkness, God, in his infinite wisdom, offered a beacon, a sign impossible to ignore amidst the gathering storm. He raised a man who would defy the very nature of mortality, a man destined to live an astounding 969 years. Methuselah. Everything shifted on a seemingly ordinary morning, a day destined to be forever etched in the annals of history. Enoch's son was born, his arrival heralded by the frail, yet resilient cry of a newborn. That first wail sliced through the heavy silence of their humble cabin, a fragile sound that spoke of both vulnerability and the indomitable spark of life. The baby was small and delicate, yet his eyes, dark and profound, opened like twin mirrors reflecting the star-strewn tapestry of the night sky. Enoch, his father, felt a chilling premonition, a primal fear that transcended the ordinary anxieties of parenthood. It was a sense of immense responsibility, of a destiny far grander and more terrifying than he could comprehend. Enoch's wife, her breath still ragged from the throes of childbirth, cradled the child close to her chest and asked in a near whisper, her voice laced with exhaustion and a fragile hope, "What will the name be?" Enoch paused, his gaze distant as if he were listening to a voice carried on the ether, a message resonating beyond the crackling flames of the hearth. "Your name will be Methuselah." The following dawn bled across the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fiery red that filtered through a veil of thin mist. The village stirred to life, awakened by the clang of hammers against stone, the rasping sound of heavy objects being dragged across the earth, the strident voices of men arguing over boundary lines. Enoch walked with the baby nestled securely in his arms, his heart heavy with a sense of foreboding. He saw men in the distance, their faces contorted with anger as they engaged in a heated dispute. The glint of a makeshift blade flashed momentarily in the sunlight, a stark reminder of the violence simmering beneath the surface of their seemingly peaceful existence. The strife was still localized, confined to petty squabbles, but it was spreading like a tenacious weed, threatening to choke the life out of their community. As night descended, painting the world in shadows, Enoch was plagued by a vivid and terrifying dream. He envisioned water, an endless expanse of water, rising inexorably, swallowing everything in its path. Houses crumbled and disappeared beneath the waves, voices were silenced, and the entire world seemed to dissolve back into the primordial chaos from which it had sprung. Enoch jolted awake, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his body slick with cold sweat. The sky outside was too clear, too serene, a stark contrast to the apocalyptic vision that still haunted his mind. He stepped outside, drawn by an unseen force, and heard the trees creaking in the gentle breeze, their voices whispering secrets he couldn't quite decipher. He spoke, his voice barely above a murmur, as if yearning to be heard, not by mortal men, but by the divine presence that permeated the universe. "If you're still near, guide my steps." There was no booming thunder, no blinding flash of lightning, only a sudden, profound peace that settled over him like an invisible hand resting upon his heart. Enoch returned to his cabin, forever changed by the night's encounter. He knew with unwavering certainty that his life would never be the same. The comfortable routines and familiar rhythms of his existence had been irrevocably shattered. After that night, he remained outwardly the same. His hands still worked the clay, molding it into vessels of beauty and utility. The fire still burned brightly before dawn, warming his family against the chill. But inside, a profound transformation had taken place. A new journey had begun. He started venturing out at dawn, drawn to the solitary hill where the wind howled freely. There, far removed from the clamor and distractions of the village, the silence seemed deeper, more profound than the darkness of the night. Enoch spoke to the unseen, addressing the divine as if conversing with a present companion. There was no ostentation, no theatrical display, only a sincere seeking of direction, a yearning for connection. And as time passed, the villagers began to realize that he walked with God, that he possessed a unique and profound connection to the divine. This set him apart, marking him as an anomaly in their midst. While the village was consumed by escalating tensions, by disputes over land and boundaries, Enoch sought righteousness, seeking to embody the virtues of compassion, justice, and humility. He didn't shout his pronouncements from the rooftops, nor did he seek to impose his beliefs upon others. Instead, he gently pointed the way, offering guidance and wisdom to those who were willing to listen. He spoke of the Creator not as a distant rumor or a philosophical abstraction, but as a tangible presence, an ever-watchful and loving force that permeated all of creation. Some mocked him, dismissing his beliefs as naive or delusional. Others averted their gazes, uncomfortable with the quiet conviction that radiated from him. But some, burdened by their own guilt and gripped by fear of the future, approached him in secret, seeking solace and guidance. Jared, a respected elder in the village, warned him, his voice laced with concern. "The world doesn't like those who live like this." Enoch simply replied, his eyes filled with unwavering conviction, "I just want to be real." Time, however, continued its relentless march forward, an unstoppable river carving its way through the landscape of existence. Methuselah grew from a babe in arms to a rambunctious child, then to a strong and capable man, eventually becoming an elder himself, a figure so ancient and enduring that the villagers could no longer adequately define him. People were born, lived their fleeting lives, and died under the same vast sky, while Methuselah remained, not as a king or a warrior, but as a silent witness, a living testament to the passage of time and the unfolding drama of humanity. And time flowed around him, unyielding in its current. Houses and roads multiplied, stretching across the landscape like grasping tendrils, and ambitions swelled to fill the newly created spaces. Violence ceased to be an aberration, an occasional outburst of passion, and instead became a calculated method, a tool employed to achieve desired ends. Injustice ossified into a habit, a comfortable and accepted practice. The strong, emboldened by their power, seized what they desired without regard for the rights or needs of others. The cunning and deceitful labeled their treachery as cleverness, celebrating their ability to manipulate and exploit those around them. The weak, stripped of their agency and left vulnerable, learned to hide, to disappear into the shadows in order to survive. Desire, unbridled and insatiable, became the sole guiding force behind every choice, and empty, self-serving phrases echoed through the streets. "I take what I want. I deserve it. I can." Enoch, his heart heavy with sorrow, observed everything as if witnessing a catastrophic flood slowly forming in the distance, a gathering storm that threatened to engulf everything he held dear. His unwavering firmness, his commitment to righteousness, was as bothersome as the harsh glare of light to eyes accustomed to the comforting embrace of darkness. One morning, as the sun began its ascent into the sky, Enoch summoned his son, Methuselah, to accompany him on a trek to the summit of the hill. There, a collection of weathered stones stood in silent formation, each one a marker of time, worn smooth by the relentless kiss of the wind. "I need to remember this," Enoch said, his voice tinged with urgency. "Every moment God gives us is valuable, and time can run out." Methuselah looked down at the village below, a sprawling tapestry of interconnected lives. He saw wisps of smoke rising from dozens of fires, each one a testament to the activities and dramas unfolding within the dwellings below. He heard the faint echoes of laughter and angry disputes, the cacophony of human existence rising to meet him on the wind. And he felt the immense weight of centuries beginning to settle upon his shoulders, a burden of responsibility and a growing sense of dread. "Dad, how long does God endure?" "As long as necessary," Enoch replied, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, "but not forever." That night, Methuselah was awakened by a sudden and chilling silence, the abrupt cessation of a distant argument that had been raging for hours. He remembered his father's dream, the terrifying vision of waters without boundaries, a deluge that consumed everything. And for the first time, he truly understood that his extraordinary longevity was not a reward, a blessing to be cherished, but a dire warning, a burden of responsibility. Before dawn, he ventured out into the oppressive darkness, his heart heavy with apprehension. He faced the heavens, his voice a mere whisper in the vast expanse of the night, hoping to be heard from above. If there's still time, use it. So, he added another mark to the stone, a physical reminder that the sky clock keeps ticking, relentlessly counting down the moments that remain. The wind shifted, and with it, the very sound of the world seemed to transform. The village was no longer simply a cluster of humble huts, a collection of families living in relative harmony. It had morphed into a tangled web of lives, competing interests, and bitter disputes. Where silence had once reigned, now there was an incessant cacophony of noise. The clang of hammers, the strident shouts of merchants, the raucous laughter of drunken revelers, music attempting to drown out the whispers of guilt and conscience. Methuselah walked among the houses as if traversing a fading memory, a landscape that no longer resonated with his soul. He was still physically strong, his body resilient despite the passage of countless years, but the time he carried on his shoulders was not simply the weight of age. It was the crushing weight of bearing witness, of watching the slow and agonizing decay of humanity. The stones on the hill remained, a silent sentinel standing against the encroaching darkness. He would return from time to time, compelled to align others, as if he could, with his own mortal hands, somehow influence God's unwavering patience. Each mark he made was a warning, a plea for repentance and a testament to the dwindling time that remained. It was during one of those solitary returns that he received the unexpected news. His wife was pregnant. The announcement should have been met with unadulterated joy, and in truth it was. But it also brought with it a wave of fear, a stark reminder that each birth was a new thread tying the world to a future that seemed increasingly bleak and uncertain. Methuselah held her belly gently, as if he were protecting more than just a child, as if protecting a last chance. When the boy was born, his cry echoed through the house, a sound so piercing and powerful that for a fleeting moment, it drowned out everything else. Methuselah took him in his arms, cradling him close. The baby's skin still smelled of blood and milk, the primal sense of life and creation. The tiny fingers closed reflexively in the air, searching for something to hold on to, a connection to the world into which he had just been thrust. The father looked into the newly opened eyes and felt a strange sensation, a complex blend of emotions. It wasn't just tenderness, the inherent love and protectiveness that all parents feel for their children. It was a chilling certainty, a premonition that this boy would see things that no one should ever have to witness, horrors beyond imagination. Lamech grew up in a time of unprecedented abundance. There was more food than ever before, more elaborate instruments to create music, more extravagant parties to celebrate their prosperity, more empty promises whispered on the wind. And in equal measure, there was more exploitation, more envy, more pervasive brutality. Methuselah saw young people taking pride in conquering, in dominating others, as if such actions were a sacred right, a divine mandate. I saw men deciding the worth of other human beings as if they were simply setting the price of an animal at market, devoid of empathy or compassion. And I saw women crying silently, their tears swallowed by the darkness, because crying out loud was already considered a dangerous act of defiance. He tried to instill in his son the wisdom that Enoch had imparted to him, to walk a straight path even when the world twisted and turned, to remain true to his values in the face of overwhelming corruption. But teaching was like planting seeds on hard, infertile ground. Sometimes they sprouted, nurtured by a spark of hope, but more often than not, they withered and died, unable to take root in the barren landscape. One afternoon, when Lamech was still a teenager, he returned home with a bruised and bloodied face and clothes covered in dirt. Methuselah pulled him close to the firelight, his eyes filled with concern. What happened? Lamech hesitated, carefully choosing each word as if navigating a treacherous minefield. A man wanted to take what was not his. I stopped him. Methuselah saw his son's hands trembling, not out of fear, but from barely contained anger. He took a deep breath, attempting to calm the storm raging within his son's heart. Anger is easy, justice is harder. And what does God do when no one wants justice? Lamech asked, his voice breaking with a mixture of frustration and despair. Methuselah remained silent for a long moment, his gaze distant as he wrestled with the profound implications of his son's question. Inside, the same ancient vision stirred, the terrifying specter of waters rising, voices swallowed by the encroaching deluge. God waits for a while. Lamech lowered his head, his shoulders slumping with the weight of his disillusionment. In that simple gesture, Methuselah recognized a profound struggle taking place within his son's soul. It was not only a battle against the bad men who sought to exploit and oppress others, but also against the insidious temptation to give up, to surrender to the darkness, to abandon all hope of being good in a world that seemed determined to embrace evil. The years continued to march onward, an endless procession of seasons and events. Jared died, joining the countless souls who had departed this earthly realm. Many others were born, their arrival heralded by the same cries of life and hope that had greeted Lamech's birth. And Methuselah continued to endure, a living monument to the enduring power of time. Some treated him as a legend, a mythical figure whose very existence defied the natural order. Others avoided him like an omen, fearing that his continued presence portended some impending doom. Children pointed at him and whispered, their voices filled with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Old people looked at him with a certain reverence, as if his existence were a living question, a challenge to their understanding of the world. Why does God still allow it? Enoch, in turn, seemed less and less tethered to the earth, his spirit increasingly detached from the material world. He walked as if treading lightly, as if the ground no longer held any authority over him, as if he were already halfway to his final destination. Sometimes he disappeared for days at a time, venturing out into the wilderness alone. When he returned, his eyes were wet with unshed tears, and he possessed a radiant glow that was not of this world, an otherworldly luminescence that hinted at the divine encounters he had experienced. When he spoke, he did so in a simple and straightforward manner, but with a profound sense of destiny, as if he were conveying a message of vital importance. Do not trust what your eyes desire. Trust what God says. Few listened, their hearts hardened by greed and self-interest. Many laughed, dismissing his words as the ramblings of an old fool. Some grew irritated, resentful of the challenge he posed to their comfortable and self-serving worldview. And Methuselah realized with a profound sense of sorrow that the distance between heaven and humans was not a lack of God's presence, but rather a consequence of human refusal, a deliberate turning away from the divine light. The seasons passed quickly, blurring into a relentless cycle of birth, growth, and decay, and people no longer spoke of the future with trepidation, with a sense of foreboding. Instead, they spoke with an unbridled eagerness, their voices filled with anticipation of the pleasures and material comforts that awaited them. The village continued to expand, its boundaries stretching further and further into the surrounding countryside. The paths filled up with throngs of people, all jostling for position, all seeking to advance their own interests. And the night was taken over by lavish parties that invariably ended in brawls and broken promises. Methuselah watched everything with the weary patience of someone who had witnessed the beginning and now perceived the end drawing near. Enoch, however, remained detached, his spirit increasingly removed from the turmoil and corruption of the world. As the world became noisier, more chaotic, he became quieter, more introspective. There were moments when he would stop abruptly, as if listening to footsteps that no one else could hear, as if attuned to a frequency that was beyond the range of human perception. One morning, before the sun had fully risen. Painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Enoch summoned Methuselah. It wasn't a loud call, a shout that echoed through the village, just a firm and unwavering look directed towards his door. A silent communication that conveyed the certainty that a conversation of vital importance needed to take place. "Come with me." They walked in silence to the stone hill, their footsteps the only sound breaking the stillness of the morning. The wind was cold, biting at their exposed skin, and the sky was a somber gray, reflecting the heavy atmosphere that hung over them. Methuselah felt his father lighter, as if the earth had already begun to release its hold on him, as if he were already in the process of transitioning to another realm. Enoch placed his hand on his son's shoulder, his touch surprisingly firm despite his advanced age. "I don't have much time left. Keep walking even when no one else wants to. Teach your child not to sell their soul for a piece of land. And remind everyone that time is given, not taken." When they returned, the village was already awake, bustling with activity. People were hurrying past with baskets laden with goods, discussing prices and engaging in petty haggling, laughing loudly as they gossiped about the latest scandals. No one seemed to notice the weight of that morning, the sense of impending doom that hung in the air. No one noticed that the sky seemed closer, as if the heavens were about to descend upon them. In the days that followed, Enoch began walking alone more often, drawn to the solitude of the wilderness. He used to leave early, before the sun had even begun to peek over the horizon, and come back late, long after darkness had enveloped the land. Sometimes, he didn't return at all, spending nights under the star-strewn sky, communing with the divine. Methuselah watched him, unable to stop him, his heart heavy with a mixture of love, concern, and a growing sense of resignation. It was like trying to hold the wind, to capture something that was inherently free and uncontainable. So came the afternoon when Enoch left and did not return, his departure shrouded in mystery. The sun went down, casting long and distorted shadows across the landscape. The cold crept in through the cracks in the walls, chilling their bones and filling the air with a sense of foreboding. Enoch's wife asked about him once, then twice, her voice trembling with anxiety. And Methuselah responded with feigned calm, attempting to mask the fear that was gnawing at his insides. "They are already coming." But inside, the restlessness was growing, spreading through him like a wildfire. When night fell, casting the world into an impenetrable darkness, Methuselah grabbed a torch and climbed the hill, his footsteps echoing in the oppressive silence. Then he descended into the valley, calling for his father in a low voice, as if he feared the world would mock him, would ridicule his desperate search for a man who seemed to have vanished into thin air. Other men joined the search, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and a growing sense of unease. Some laughed, their voices laced with cynicism, saying that the righteous man had finally lost his way, that his devotion to God had led him to madness and ruin. Others remained silent, their faces etched with worry, because Enoch's absence didn't feel like death, didn't carry the weight of finality. Methuselah searched until the early morning, his body exhausted, his spirit drained. He scoured trails, overturned stones, pushed through thick shrubs, his eyes searching for any sign of his father. He didn't find a body, no trace of Enoch's mortal remains. He didn't find blood, no evidence of violence or foul play. He didn't find any sign of a fight, no indication of a struggle. Just footprints that ended abruptly where they shouldn't have, as if the path had been cut off by an invisible door, as if Enoch had simply stepped into another dimension. At dawn, exhausted and defeated, he returned to the village, his heart heavy with grief and confusion. People wanted a simple explanation, a coherent narrative that fit within the confines of their limited understanding, a story that could be easily repeated and digested. Methuselah could only tell the truth, as fragmented and unbelievable as it seemed. "It was a statue," someone replied, his voice filled with skepticism. "Did he die then?" "No, if he had died, I would have found him." The rumor spread through the village like wildfire, carried on the whispers of fear and speculation. Some called it madness, dismissing Methuselah's account as the ravings of a grieving son. Others called it a fable, a fantastical tale designed to inspire awe and wonder. But deep down, everyone felt an ancient fear, a primal sense of dread, as if God had come too close to be ignored, as if the divine presence had breached the veil between the worlds. Lamech came to him before noon with a tense face, as if afraid to say out loud what everyone already suspected. Around, some men made the sign to ward off bad luck, a superstitious gesture designed to protect them from the perceived evil that Enoch's disappearance represented. Others looked away, unable to meet Methuselah's gaze, their hearts filled with a mixture of fear and guilt. The news was not just a loss, a personal tragedy for Methuselah and his family. It was a warning, a sign of the times. If God could take a man for himself, could elevate a mortal to the heavens, then he could also take the world for judgment, could unleash his wrath upon a sinful and corrupt creation. That night, Methuselah stood alone before the stones on the hill, the silent witnesses to the passage of time. The wind passed through them like a whisper of farewell, a mournful lament for a world on the brink of destruction. He knelt, touched the ground, and realized it was trembling, not from the cold, but from reverence, as if the earth itself recognized the divine presence that had recently passed through its midst. If Enoch could not be found, so life could end without death. And if that was possible, if the natural order could be defied, then it was also possible that the judgment was real, that the impending doom was not simply a figment of his imagination. Methuselah stood up slowly and looked at the sky, his gaze searching the heavens for some sign of hope. "What do you want from us?" There was no reply in words, no divine pronouncements echoing through the sky. But there was one certainty, a profound and undeniable conviction that settled deep within his soul. Time was passing more quickly. The clock was ticking down with increasing speed. And somewhere in the depths of the future, the name of a boy was already being prepared, a child who would be born as a promise of rest, a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. The void left by Enoch did not close, did not simply heal with the passage of time. It hovered over the village like an open door, a portal to another realm that no one dared to cross. Some pretended that nothing had happened, attempting to ignore the gaping hole that had been torn in the fabric of their reality. And they returned to the parties, the business deals, the land disputes, the petty squabbles that had consumed their lives before Enoch's disappearance. Others began to speak in whispers, their voices hushed with fear, because the absence of the righteous man reminded them that the sky was still watching, that the divine gaze was still upon them. Methuselah continued living, enduring the endless cycle of days and nights, but now he lived with a wound, a deep and unhealing scar on his soul. It was not just longing for his lost father, a yearning for the guidance and wisdom that Enoch had provided. It was a constant foreboding, a nagging sense of impending doom. If God could take a man without leaving a trace, then God could also end an entire era, could wipe the slate clean and start anew. And the era seemed to decay with each passing generation, spiraling further and further into corruption and depravity. Lamech became an adult in a world of excesses, a society consumed by greed and violence. He saw men calling violence a right, justifying their brutality with empty rhetoric. He saw greed celebrated as a virtue, a sign of success and ambition. He saw alliances sealed in lies, families broken by pride, and innocence being treated as weakness, their vulnerability exploited for the gain of others. Even so, Lamech carried within him an internal struggle, a constant battle between his conscience and the corrupting influences of the world around him. He wanted to remain whole, to preserve his integrity in a society that was rapidly falling apart. Methuselah watched him, his heart filled with a mixture of hope and apprehension. And sometimes he saw a glimmer of resistance in his son, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished, small but real. So when Lamech had already lived enough years to have seen wickedness repeat itself like a cycle, his wife became pregnant. The news spread through the house like fire, igniting a spark of joy in the midst of the darkness. For the first time in a long time, Methuselah felt something akin to hope, a fragile and tentative emotion. Not naive hope, a blind belief that everything would magically be better, but desperate hope like finding water in the desert, a desperate clinging to the possibility of redemption. On the night of the birth, the sky was heavy with dark clouds, the air thick and oppressive. The wind was warm, carrying with it a fine layer of dust that coated everything in a film of grime. Lamech's wife was yelling, her cries echoing through the house, and each scream seemed to challenge the world itself, a primal expression of pain and defiance. When the baby's cry finally filled the room, the sound was like a rupture, a break in the relentless cycle of despair, a new beginning amidst the end. Lamech held his son with trembling hands, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and fear. The boy was small and fragile, but there was a quiet strength in him, a sense of resilience that belied his tender age. His eyes opened, reflecting the fire of the lamp, and for a moment, Lamech stood still, transfixed by the gaze of his newborn son, as if remembering everything he had lost, all the dreams that had been shattered, and all that could still be lost. Methuselah approached, drawn by an unseen force. He had already witnessed countless births, but this one seemed different, imbued with a significance that transcended the ordinary. Not by a visible miracle, no divine intervention that defied the laws of nature, but by context, by the circumstances surrounding the birth. The world was too sick, too corrupted, for birth to be just routine, a simple and unremarkable event. Lamech took a deep breath and spoke, his voice filled with determination, as if declaring a war against despair. He will be called Noah. The house became silent, the air thick with anticipation. The name seemed too short, too simple to carry so much weight, to bear the burden of hope that it represented. Lamech held his son to his chest, cradling him close, and looking up at the dark ceiling. He spoke words that came from an ancient hope, as if the ground itself was crying out for relief, yearning for respite from the suffering and toil that plagued humanity. That the boy would bring comfort from the hard work and pain that the cursed land poured onto human hands. Methuselah heard and felt his eyes burn with tears, not because he naively believed that a baby would magically erase centuries of corruption, but because he knew that God was still planting signs, still offering glimmers of hope in the midst of the encroaching darkness. In the days that followed, Noah grew up under mixed gazes, his very existence a source of controversy and speculation. Some laughed at the name, deriding the notion of comfort and proclaiming that the world belonged to the strong, to those who were willing to seize power and dominate others. Others, weary of the constant struggle, just wished it were true, yearning for a reprieve from the endless cycle of toil and suffering. Lamech taught his son to work hard, to listen attentively, not to bow to brutality, to stand up for what was right even in the face of overwhelming opposition. And Methuselah, already centuries old, watched the boy with an attention that transcended human limitations, his gaze imbued with a wisdom and foresight that came from bearing witness to the unfolding drama of human history. Like someone watching a flame in the middle of a field of dry straw, carefully tending to the fragile spark of hope, but the land around continued to descend into chaos, its descent accelerating with each passing season. With each season, the evil seemed to take on new forms, becoming more insidious and pervasive. It wasn't just blood and violence, the outward manifestations of human depravity. It was a deformation of the heart, a corruption of the very essence of humanity. Men took women as if they were taking objects, devoid of respect or compassion. The given word didn't mean anything. Promises were broken as easily as they were made. Shame was considered backwardness, a sign of weakness. And even worse, many called it freedom, celebrating the unbridled pursuit of pleasure and self-gratification as the ultimate expression of human liberty. Methuselah walked through the streets and saw empty eyes, devoid of empathy or compassion. He saw children learning to lie too early, their innocence stolen by the harsh realities of the world. He saw hardened old men and arrogant young people, their hearts consumed by greed and ambition. And he saw no fear of God, no sense of accountability, no awareness of the consequences of their actions. Sometimes he thought about Enoch and the radiant glow his father had possessed when talking about God, the unwavering faith that had sustained him through countless trials. Now the village's brilliance came from polished metal and unbridled desires, from the outward displays of wealth and power. The pursuit of material possessions had become the sole purpose of existence. One afternoon, Methuselah found Lamech sitting outside the house, looking at the ground with a distant and troubled expression. Nearby, Noah was playing, gathering small stones and arranging them in intricate patterns. Noah lifted a stone and placed it on another, forming a small tower, a testament to his patient and deliberate nature. The gesture was simple, childlike. Even so, Methuselah felt as if he was seeing an omen, a prophetic vision of someone building patiently amidst the chaos, laying the foundation for a new world. That night, when everyone was sleeping, their dreams filled with fantasies of power and wealth, Methuselah returned to the hill and touched the old stones, his fingers tracing the weathered surfaces. He added one more slowly, carefully placing it alongside the others, as if giving a final warning, a last plea for repentance. And staring at the sky, he felt the same certainty that had haunted him since Enoch's disappearance, the unwavering conviction that the time of judgment was drawing near. Time still existed, but it was running out, like sand slipping through his fingers. In the distance, thunder without rain loomed, a silent harbinger of the storm to come. Methuselah closed his eyes and understood that God was calling a man, and it would be Noah, chosen in silence to carry out a task of immense importance. Wickedness didn't arrive all at once, did not descend upon them like a sudden and devastating plague. She spread like smoke, insidious and pervasive, entering through the cracks in their defenses, slowly poisoning their minds and hearts. What used to cause shock and outrage became commonplace, accepted as simply the way things were. What used to be a source of shame and embarrassment turned into a joke, a subject of casual amusement. And when the night fell, it wasn't just the sky that darkened. It was the intentions of men, the darkness of their souls that cast a pall over the world. Methuselah crossed the streets and saw the same scene repeated with new masks, with new actors playing out the same tired and corrupt roles. Strong men deciding fates, wielding their power with impunity. Drunken voices calling cruelty a right, justifying their brutality with empty rhetoric. Families trading their own honor for security, sacrificing their integrity in the pursuit of material comfort. The land seemed fertile, yielding abundant harvests, but the heart of humanity was barren, devoid of compassion or empathy. It was then that the sky in silence weighed upon creation, a heavy and oppressive presence that foreshadowed the impending storm. At that time, Noah was already a grown man, his youth fading into the distance. He was not perfect in the eyes of others, flawed and imperfect like all human beings. But there was something rare and remarkable about him, a boundary that he refused to cross, a moral compass that guided his actions. When everyone else chased excess, he stepped back, choosing moderation and restraint. When everyone laughed at fear, dismissing the consequences of their actions, he kept the fear, acknowledging the divine judgment that awaited them. And that isolated him, setting him apart from the crowd. On a quiet morning, as the wind blew dust over the fields, coating the landscape in a fine layer of grime, Noah paused, not from fatigue, but from the impact of an unseen force. It was as if a divine presence had taken his breath away, paralyzing him in place. He didn't see a form, nor hear a human voice, but he understood with unwavering certainty that God was speaking to him. And this understanding came with a weight that bent his knees, forcing him to his knees in supplication. The message was not comfort, not a soothing balm for his troubled soul. It was truth, raw and unfiltered. God saw, God measured. God was not distant, not detached from the suffering of humanity. And what he saw was corruption to the core, violence as language, thoughts inclined to evil. The ancient world had become a place where life was cheap and pride was an altar, a testament to the vanity and self-worship of humanity. Noah went home with a pale face, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and dread. His wife noticed that something had changed, that a profound transformation had taken place within him. But he couldn't explain it right away, couldn't find the words to articulate the weight of the divine message he had received. how to put into words the sound of a sentence, the pronouncement of impending doom. How to tell her that the time of patience had a date, that the divine forbearance was about to expire. That night, Methuselah sought him out, drawn by an unseen force. The old man carried centuries in his gaze, bearing the weight of human history, and he recognized in Noah's expression the same premonition that once burned within Enoch, the same awareness of an impending cataclysm. Methuselah closed his eyes for a moment, his face etched with sorrow. Part of him wanted to deny it, to dismiss the impending doom as a figment of his imagination. Another part knew that denial would be an insult, a betrayal of the divine trust that had been placed upon his family. He opened his eyes and simply asked what God commanded. Noah took a deep breath, as if each word had to pass through stone, as if he were chiseling the truth into the very fabric of existence. A chest. The word sounded strange, foreign, like something from another world. Nothing that transpired was arbitrary. Everything unfolded with divine purpose, a calculated orchestration of events. And with this order came a somber, almost funereal promise, resonating like a mournful melody. The deluge was inevitable. The world, steeped in sin and corruption, would be purged, forcibly cleansed. The brutal violence sown by humankind would return upon them like a devastating flood, a tidal wave of karmic retribution. Methuselah felt the very ground beneath him crumble, his connection to the familiar world dissolving. For a fleeting moment, the prophetic vision he had glimpsed before returned, now stark and unclouded, devoid of any obscuring fog. He saw houses submerged, once vibrant homes now swallowed by the encroaching waters. He heard the silent screams of the drowning, a chorus of despair swallowed by the abyss. And amidst this apocalyptic tableau, a distant flame flickered, a beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. The same flame that Enoch, his ancestor, had envisioned in his dreams, now identified, given a name. The Arkansas god also spoke of a covenant, a sacred pact, not with the masses, not with the fickle crowds, but with a single, steadfast man, willing to embrace obedience when the rest of the world reveled in scornful laughter. And he commanded that Noah should not construct this vessel solely for his own salvation, but for the preservation of his entire household, his wife, his sons, and their wives. Salvation, in this grand, divinely ordained plan, would be a familiar burden, a heavy cross to bear, like carrying the immense weight of hope upon one's weary back. Then came the revelation, the detail that no one, in their finite understanding, would ever believe unless it was indelibly etched into the very fabric of Noah's consciousness. Creatures would be preserved, spared from the impending doom. Animals of every kind, from the creeping insects to the soaring birds, would enter the ark, guided not by common instinct or primal urges, but by divine decree, by an unseen hand directing their path. The ark would transcend its function as a mere shelter. It would serve as a tangible testament to God's unwavering ability to begin anew, to forge a new creation without sacrificing the essence of what he had initially brought into existence. Noah listened intently, absorbing every word, and the acceptance, while dutiful, brought with it a profound ache, a deep-seated sorrow. It signified a poignant farewell to the old world, to the life he had known, even before the first drops of rain began to fall. The next morning, Noah did not commence with grand pronouncements or theatrical displays. He began with simple, unwavering obedience. He meticulously chose the wood, selected each piece with discerning care, marked the land with precision, measured the space with calculated accuracy, and raised the first beams, the skeletal structure of salvation. Each deliberate stroke of his tools was an announcement, a silent proclamation of what was to come. The neighbors, initially drawn by idle curiosity, came to observe his progress. Their curiosity soon morphed into mockery, their faces contorted with derision. They labeled Noah as crazy, a coward, a man hopelessly clinging to ancient, outdated stories. Some erupted in boisterous laughter, desperately trying to drown out the whispers of their own hearts, the creeping tendrils of doubt that threatened to take root. Noah, however, remained unfazed. He did not engage in pointless arguments or futile attempts at justification. He simply continued his work, driven by his unwavering faith. Methuselah, observing from afar, his heart heavy with sorrow, understood the profound implications of Noah's actions. The greatest chasm, he realized, would not be between the rich and the poor, the strong and the weak. It would lie between those who dismissed the word of God as mere noise, a meaningless babble, and those who embraced it as the very essence of life. Upon the familiar hill of stones that afternoon, Methuselah added another mark, a silent acknowledgement of the approaching end. His hand trembled, not from physical weakness, but from a profound awareness of the fleeting nature of time. For the first time in his extraordinarily long life, he did not question the purpose of his extended existence. He understood. He had lived to witness this, to see the divine plan unfold before his very eyes. The ark, which appeared insignificant to the unseeing eyes of the masses, loomed enormous in the context of time, a monument to faith and obedience. In its nascent stages, it seemed like nothing more than a man undertaking an extravagant construction project in the middle of parched land, a whimsical folly. But as the beams grew taller, the sides rose higher, and the structure began to cast a shadow where previously there had been only dust and unrelenting sun. A sense of unease began to permeate the air. Each passing day added weight to Noah's endeavors and peeled away a new layer of scorn from those who watched him. The first to approach were the merely curious. They sauntered by slowly scrutinizing the measurements, trying to decipher the underlying logic of such an outlandish undertaking. Some feigned innocence, their questions dripping with sarcasm. "Noah, what are you building? A house for giants?" He replied without theatrics, his voice calm and steady. "A refuge. Refuge from what?" Noah paused for a moment, as if weighing the value of honesty against the inevitability of mockery. "From the judgment." The single word was enough to ignite a firestorm of laughter, loud, cruel, nervous laughter. The kind of laughter that served as a shield, an attempt to bury the creeping tendrils of fear deep within their hearts. The ark became the topic of every conversation, the subject of countless rumors and speculations. Where they once discussed harvests and livestock, they now talked incessantly about the crazy-wood guy, the man consumed by his delusional project. Where they used to talk business and trade, they now fabricated elaborate stories to ridicule Noah, to diminish his efforts. Some speculated that he harbored ambitions of becoming king of a floating city, a tyrannical ruler of the seas. Others whispered that he had succumbed to madness, driven by unseen voices that only he could hear. Still others claimed it was an elaborate scheme to acquire cheap labor, a deceptive ploy to exploit the desperate. And amidst this cacophony of ridicule and disbelief, Noah kept going, his resolve unwavering. Hammer, rope, cut, fit, obedience, each action a testament to his unwavering faith. Methuselah watched in silence, a silent observer of humanity's descent into chaos. He had witnessed the creation of all sorts of tools, fences to divide, weapons to destroy, but he had never witnessed someone building with such unwavering conviction, answering the mockery of the world with the quiet strength of one who answers to the heavens. Over time, the mockery escalated into persecution. Some began to actively sabotage the work, fueled by a deep-seated resentment towards Noah's unwavering faith. They stole tools, untied ropes, maliciously knocked down meticulously stacked piles of wood. Noah, undeterred, simply gathered everything and started again, his spirit unyielding. It wasn't passivity that drove him, but unwavering persistence. It was as if each attack, each act of sabotage, served as further proof that the world couldn't bear the memory of God, that they desperately sought to erase any trace of his presence. Once, a group of drunk men appeared at dusk, their faces flushed with alcohol, laughing boisterously, pushing each other around, and throwing small stones at the partially completed structure. One of them, emboldened by liquid courage, shouted, "Noah, when that water comes, call me. I'll swim in." The others erupted in laughter, their voices echoing in the twilight. Noah stood still, his gaze fixed upon them, unwavering and unwavering. For a moment, His silence was more powerful than any words he could have spoken, heavier than any condemnation. He simply said, "I won't be able to call later." The laughter subsided, but it did not give way to regret or remorse. It transformed into irritation, a simmering resentment towards the man who dared to challenge their worldview. One of the men spat on the ground in disgust, and the group stumbled away into the night. As the ark grew larger, more imposing, something strange began to occur. Some who had previously mocked Noah now began to avoid passing by the construction site, not out of newfound respect, but out of a growing discomfort, a nagging feeling they couldn't quite articulate. Noah also underwent a transformation. He became more somber, spoke less frequently, and slept very little. There was a weariness in him that didn't stem from physical exertion, but from the immense weight of obeying a divine command in the face of an entire world's opposition. His family offered their support, assisting with the physical labor, but the spiritual loneliness, the burden of faith, was his alone to bear. And even so, he kept going, his resolve unbroken. Methuselah, in his long, protracted life, had witnessed men die for petty wars and for the fleeting illusion of glory and great pride. Now he was witnessing a man living, truly living, for an order, a divine mandate. And this, he realized, was rarer than any feat of longevity. The ark stood in stark contrast to the world around it. While the world was consumed with building structures to dominate and control, Noah was building to escape the dominion of evil, to find refuge from the encroaching darkness. And then came the sounds, subtle at first, but growing increasingly persistent. Not sounds from the sky, not yet, but sounds emanating from the earth itself. The sounds of animals that had previously avoided human settlements, creatures that had always kept their distance, now drawn closer by an unseen force. The sounds of light footsteps rustling through the forest, the flapping of wings at dusk, distant roars echoing through the valleys. Nobody understood at first. They dismissed it as mere coincidence, an exaggeration born of paranoia. But the strange signs continued to repeat themselves, growing in frequency and intensity. Methuselah was among the first to recognize the underlying significance of these events. Creation itself was being driven by a higher order, a force that transcended human understanding and control. The whole world seemed to be aligning itself, preparing for an event that only God fully comprehended. One afternoon, he climbed the familiar stone hill and gazed out at the horizon. The smoke from the houses rose lazily into the air. People lived, laughed, bargained, and squabbled as if time were infinite, as if the future stretched out before them without end. He felt a deep, constricting tightness in his chest, like watching someone obliviously walking towards the edge of a cliff, unaware of the impending danger. When he came down from the hill, he passed near the ark and saw Noah working silently, his face hardened by the weight of his responsibility. Methuselah approached and, for the first time in a long time, spoke as if confessing something that no one else would ever truly understand. "I have lived too long to see this, and yet it seems little." Noah stopped his work, looked at him, his eyes filled with a quiet wisdom, and replied, "Time always seems plentiful until the day it runs out." At twilight, the sky took on a strange, unsettling hue, like burnt bronze. The wind carried a damp, musty smell that was foreign to the dry land. And in the distance, a rumble of thunder echoed, not as a theatrical threat, but like the sound of a massive door being slowly, inexorably closed. The ark was nearing completion, and the mockery, although still present, began to sound weaker, less assured. Not because the people had suddenly converted to belief, but because the very atmosphere around them was changing, becoming heavy with anticipation. And in the silence between each strike of his hammer, Noah was building more than just a vessel of wood. He was building the last chance for a world that stubbornly refused to acknowledge that God's patience had a limit. The world did not pause to witness its own downfall. It continued to function as if time were an uninterrupted right, a guarantee that would never be revoked. The parties were still happening, fueled by fleeting pleasures and empty distractions. The business deals were still being brokered, driven by greed and self-interest. The petty disputes were still erupting, fueled by small reasons and inflated egos. The ark, however, was no longer just a structure, a collection of planks and beams. It had become a presence, a looming reminder of what was to come. Too tall to be ignored, too silent to be forgotten. And even so, most stubbornly preferred to pretend it was just wood, a figment of a madman's imagination. Noah finished the final details with hands that were calloused and injured, each scar a testament to his unwavering dedication. The surface of the ark bore the marks of countless hours of labor, like badges of honor, like the scars of a righteous battle. Each joint had been meticulously crafted with precision. Each compartment existed for a specific, divinely ordained reason. The door, solid and imposing, seemed disproportionately heavy for a mere entrance. It was a dividing line between two destinies, between salvation and oblivion. In those days, the wind carried a different quality, a palpable change in its texture and scent. Sometimes it blew moist and heavy, like a promise of impending rain, a harbinger of the deluge to come. Sometimes it blew dry and hot, like the last breath of a dying world, a final desperate attempt to cling to normalcy. There were nights when the sky seemed to press down upon the earth, lower and more oppressive than usual. There were early mornings when the silence was so profound it seemed to hold its breath, a pregnant pause before the storm. And then they started to arrive. Not all at once, not with fanfare or spectacle, but with an undeniable inevitability. Animals appeared on the trails, crossed open fields, and passed by men who watched them with a mixture of curiosity and incomprehension. Some were small and swift, darting through the underbrush with nimble grace. Others were large and slow, lumbering giants moving with deliberate purpose. There were couples walking together, side by side, as if they were obeying a call that did not originate from instinct, but from a divine decree, an unshakable command. The people gathered, initially driven by idle curiosity, then by a growing sense of unease. Some laughed nervously, attempting to downplay the strangeness of the spectacle. They quipped that Noah had now become a shepherd of animals, a caretaker of the wild kingdom. Others, however, remained silent, their faces etched with bewilderment, because there was no human explanation that could adequately account for what they were witnessing. Methuselah watched a herd of animals cross the dusty plains without swerving, their destination unwavering, heading directly for the Arkansas. The old man's gaze was fixed, his eyes narrowed with an intensity that belied his age. He felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a feeling that sent a shiver down his ancient spine. Pure, unadulterated fear. Not fear of death, but fear of God, a primal reverence for the awesome power of the divine. It was like seeing the invisible touch the visible, witnessing the manifestation of the supernatural in the natural world. Lamech, Noah's father, was already weakened by age. The relentless march of time was finally catching up with him. He was watching from afar, his brow furrowed, his expression pensive, as if he were chewing on a question he didn't dare to articulate out loud. What if it's true? He had lived close enough to Enoch, his own father, to know that God was not a mere rumor, a fabrication of superstitious minds. But he had also lived far enough removed from genuine fear to become accustomed to the noise of the world, the constant distractions that dulled the senses and obscured the truth. Now, however, the noise was fading, replaced by an ominous silence. Noah gathered his family together, preparing them for what was to come. The moment was devoid of any human ceremony, any grand pronouncements or emotional farewells. It was simple, almost dry, as if words were inadequate to express the weight of the occasion, and the steps they were about to take were far more important than any verbal articulation. "Come in." His wife looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears, not just out of fear of the unknown, but out of the sheer burden of what they were about to do. Entering the ark meant leaving behind everything that was familiar and beloved. Neighbors, familiar paths, cherished landscapes, precious memories. All would be forever lost to the encroaching flood. It meant acknowledging, without any possibility of denial, that the world, as they knew it, was irreversibly doomed. Noah's sons and their wives entered the ark quietly, their faces somber, their steps measured. There was no sense of triumph or celebration on their faces. There was only duty, a solemn acceptance of their assigned role in the unfolding drama. It was like walking through a door knowing you won't come back, crossing a threshold into a new, uncertain reality. Outside, the people watched, their faces a mixture of emotions. Some still mocked, clinging to their cynicism as a shield against the encroaching fear, but their mockery was fragile, strained, like the laughter of someone who doesn't even believe in their own jokes. Others stood motionless, speechless, their eyes wide with a dawning realization of the gravity of the situation. And there were those who desperately wanted to come closer, to seek refuge within the Ark's protective walls. But they lacked the courage to abandon their own lives, their own possessions, their own ingrained patterns of denial. The Ark began to fill up, slowly but surely. Animals, food supplies, essential utensils, everything necessary for survival. The order in which things were placed seemed strange, almost arbitrary, but it was the divine order, as if God were deliberately organizing the chaos before unleashing its full fury upon the world. Methuselah walked up to the structure and stopped a short distance away. The wind billowed his robe, whipping it around him like a shroud. He looked at the Ark's massive door and felt the significance of that moment's stretch across the vast expanse of his centuries-long existence. All his life, his extraordinarily long life, seemed like a road leading to this very point, to this pivotal moment. Not for human glory or personal gain, but to serve as a witness to a limit, the final line of divine patience. He did not enter the Arkansas. The world's historical records do not document his steps within its walls. The world only records that he lived 969 years, a remarkable feat of longevity. But at that moment he was more than just a number, more than just a historical statistic. He was the very symbol of the time granted, the embodiment of divine forbearance. Methuselah looked at the Ark, then at the village horizon, at the familiar scenes of daily life continuing as if nothing were amiss. Life went on. Smoke rose from the chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking fires. Voices argued over trivial matters. Children ran and played, oblivious to the impending doom. And that was what made it all the more terrible, all the more poignant. The world was on the verge of being irrevocably interrupted, its tapestry of life torn asunder. And yet, it seemed so calm, so deceptively peaceful. Noah remained inside the Ark, and the door remained open for a while longer, as if heaven was still offering one last chance, a final opportunity for repentance. The days passed like a stretched thread, each one seemingly indistinguishable from the last. The Ark stood still and silent, a looming presence in the otherwise unchanged landscape. People grew tired of watching, their initial fascination waning. Some returned to their daily routines, attempting to recapture a sense of normalcy in the face of the impending catastrophe. Some fell asleep, their minds lulled into a false sense of security, not imagining that their last sleep might be approaching, that the sleep of death was about to overtake them. And then, on the seventh day, something irrevocably changed. The air became heavy, not like before, not just with the promise of rain. This was something different, something more ominous. The air was truly heavy, as if the atmosphere itself was bracing for a cataclysmic impact. Clouds appeared on the horizon and did not dissipate. They gathered, coalesced, thickened, and darkened, forming a menacing canopy that blotted out the sun. The wind brought with it the smell of ancient water, a primordial scent that seemed to rise from the depths of the earth, from the very bowels of the planet. The men looked up, their faces etched with concern. Some laughed nervously, attempting to appear relieved, clinging to the hope that it was just a passing storm. But the relief was short-lived, because the cloud didn't behave like an ordinary weather formation. It seemed alive, imbued with a dark intelligence, filled with a chilling determination. Methuselah climbed the hill of stones for the last time, his steps slow but steady, each footfall a testament to his unwavering resolve. He looked down and saw the Ark as a massive shadow, a stark contrast to the increasingly dark landscape. He saw the people below him, milling about like agitated ants, their lives about to be disrupted forever. He saw the sky above him, a menacing roof about to collapse. He touched a stone, its surface cool and smooth beneath his weathered hand, and with an almost inaudible voice, he whispered, "Everything God postponed has arrived." In the distance, thunder erupted, not as a warning or a theatrical display, but as a definitive beginning, the starting gun of the apocalypse. And the ancient world, blissfully unaware of its impending doom, entered its last minute of normalcy. The day broke without color, devoid of any hint of warmth or light. The sky did not clear up, did not offer even a fleeting glimpse of blue. It only changed shades, shifting from the oppressive black of night to a thick, suffocating gray, like ashes spilled across the face of creation. The clouds were pressing against each other, low and heavy, without haste and without mercy, their advance relentless and unwavering. The wind blew damp and cold, carrying the same chilling scent of ancient water, a primordial fragrance that did not belong to that arid land. It was as if the world was taking one last, deep breath before plunging into the abyss. The ark remained still and silent, a steadfast beacon in the face of the encroaching storm, but now it seemed different, imbued with a new significance. Not because it had physically changed, but because the atmosphere around it had been transformed. It was no longer just wood and pitch. It was a boundary, a dividing line between two worlds. It was both judgment and mercy contained within the same volume, both destruction and salvation intertwined. Outside, the people still desperately tried to cling to their ordinary lives, their mundane routines. Some lit fireworks, attempting to dispel the gathering gloom with bursts of fleeting color and sound. Others debated prices in the marketplace, clinging to the illusion that commerce would continue unabated. Still others gathered to laugh at Noah once again, their mockery a desperate attempt to ward off the impending doom, as if laughter could somehow stop the sky from doing what it was about to do. But even the laughter faltered, losing its former conviction. The human voice itself sounded weak and insignificant in the heavy, oppressive atmosphere. Then came the sound that erased all doubt, the sound that signaled the end. It wasn't the gentle patter of falling raindrops, the soothing melody of a passing shower. It was a deep, guttural rumble, as if the earth had cracked open from within, as if the very foundations of the world were crumbling. A distant, growing underground roar, shaking the ground beneath their feet, sending tremors through the very bones. People stopped what they were doing and looked at each other, their faces etched with a mixture of confusion and dread. Some tried to pretend that it was normal, just another natural phenomenon, but no one succeeded. Thunder erupted so loudly at the top of the heavens that the very air seemed to shatter, breaking into a million shards. A lightning bolt streaked across the sky, illuminating the world for an instant with a stark, white, and unforgiving light. The houses, the faces, the ark, the empty hands, the confused eyes, all were laid bare in that fleeting moment. And then the water started. First the rain, thick, cold, heavy, as if the sky was pouring liquid stones down upon the earth. In a matter of seconds, the ground turned into a muddy quagmire. Within minutes, the familiar paths turned into raging rivers, their currents swift and unforgiving. The villagers rushed for shelter, seeking refuge from the sudden downpour, but the rain was not going to pass quickly. She had intention, a deliberate purpose, and along with her came something no one expected, something far more terrifying. Waters rising from below, bursting forth from the depths of the earth. The ground groaned and shuddered, wells overflowed, and cracks and fissures opened up in the parched land. The same land that for centuries had absorbed blood, sweat, and violence now returned water as judgment, as divine retribution. It was as if the whole world was falling apart, dissolving into a primordial soup. Shouts arose, not war cries or triumphant yells, but cries of surprise, cries of disbelief. And soon after there were screams of raw, unadulterated fear, the primal sound of creatures facing their imminent demise. Those who had mocked Noah, those who had ridiculed his efforts, now ran desperately towards the ark, their faces contorted with panic. They ran slipping and sliding on the muddy ground, stumbling over debris, their eyes wide with terror. The same man who had once laughed, boasting that he would swim in the floodwaters, was now banging on the wooden door of the ark with bleeding hands, his knuckles raw and torn. "Noah, open it! Open it!" Others joined him, their voices rising in a desperate chorus of pleas, begging, and promises. The same mouths that had dismissed God as a mere rumor, a figment of human imagination, were now trying to negotiate with heaven, attempting to barter for their lives, but the door remained firmly shut. Inside the ark, Noah heard their desperate cries, their frantic pleas. The sound of their knocking was like a hammer blow to his heart, each thud resonating with the pain of their impending doom. He clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white with the strain. His family surrounded him in silence, their faces etched with grief, their eyes overflowing with tears. They did not celebrate their salvation. There was no sense of triumph or vindication. There was only weight, the heavy burden of responsibility. There was only pain, the agonizing awareness of the suffering outside. Salvation was not a party, not a cause for revelry. It was a refuge within a sentence, a sanctuary amidst devastation. And then, without the intervention of human hands, the moment of decision arrived. The door was sealed shut, the divine seal marking the end of their opportunity. The outside world remained outside, condemned to face the consequences of its own choices. The water rose relentlessly. It surged up the streets, invading houses, tearing out furniture, and knocking down mud walls with ease. The current carried common objects as if they were weightless, insignificant debris. Pots, fabrics, tools, toys, all the tangible remnants of the ancient world turned into floating rubble, a tragic testament to the futility of earthly possessions. People tried to climb onto roofs, scramble up trees, and cling to high rocks, desperate to escape the rising waters. They tried to hold on to each other, forming human chains in a desperate attempt to survive. But the force of the water kept them apart, tearing them away from each other's grasp. The rain didn't stop. It seemed to accelerate, increasing in intensity. The sky poured without mercy, and the earth returned without compassion, the elements unleashed in their full, destructive fury. On the hill of stones, Methuselah stood alone, a solitary figure facing the apocalypse. The wind pushed against him, threatening to knock him off his feet. The rain lashed against his face like a whip, each drop a stinging reminder of the devastation unfolding below. He watched the village being swallowed by the floodwaters and felt something that transcended words, something beyond mere sadness or grief. It was a profound understanding, a complete acceptance of the divine will. He remembered the father who walked with God, Enoch, his ancestor, a man of unwavering faith. He remembered the silence, the quiet communion with the divine. He remembered the marked stones, each one a testament to the passage of time and the approach of judgment. And he realized that his long life had always been an interval, a grace period granted to humanity. 969 years of interval, a time given for humanity to repent, to turn away from its wickedness and embrace the divine. A time extended beyond what seemed humanly possible, a testament to God's boundless patience. A time that many wasted, squandering their opportunity by calling divine patience weakness, mistaking forbearance for apathy. The water was already touching the base of the hill, lapping at the stones beneath his feet. Methuselah closed his eyes for a moment, his face turned towards the heavens. There is no record of his last words, no written account of his final thoughts. There is no description of his fall, no dramatic depiction of his demise. The historical document mentions him with the simplicity of a number, a mere figure in the annals of time, and such simplicity is brutal, almost dismissive. He lived and he died. The film, however, understands the symbol without inventing what was not said, without adding unnecessary embellishment. He does not need a final speech, a dramatic pronouncement to justify his existence. His silence before the court of divine judgment is the message itself, a testament to the power of quiet faith. In the distance, the ark began to move, rising slowly but surely, a light floating vessel lifted from the ground as if it were just another creature obeying the divine decree. She rose above the churning waters while the world around her was sinking into oblivion, a stark contrast between salvation and destruction. Days went by without sun, the darkness unrelenting. The water covered the fields, covered the paths, covered the hills, covered the memories, covered the pride, covered the names, erasing the old world from existence. And the sky, once distant and seemingly indifferent, now seemed as close as one's own breath, a constant reminder of the divine presence. Not because God had changed, but because man had finally lost everything he used to distract himself, everything he used to shield himself from the truth. The ark went on, a lonely vessel sailing outside a raging storm. Inside, silence reigned, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Breathing, life preserved, a fragile sanctuary amidst the devastation. The creation that had been dragged into corruption was now guarded by wood and faith, a testament to the power of obedience. And when the ancient world disappeared underwater, swallowed by the all-consuming flood, one truth stayed above the deluge, like a final echo, resonating through the ages. God did not delay because he was weak or powerless. He was late because he was patient, extending the opportunity for repentance until the very last moment. Methuselah, the man who lived 969 years, was not just a human record, a statistical anomaly. He was the living proof that heaven waited, that divine forbearance had a limit. And the flood was the final proof that when heaven decides, when divine judgment is finally unleashed, it follows through, its execution unwavering and absolute. The waters continued to rise, and the time of the ancient world came to an end. Not with applause or triumphant celebrations, not with explanations or justifications, but with absolute silence, a profound and unsettling stillness. Above this silence, the sound of the wind and the waves, the creaking of the wood, the floating ark was saying, without words, that God could still start over, that hope could still be found amidst devastation.